This one's on.
Okay. Well, let's kick off the final panel today. And so I am very, very happy to have three folks here from very different perspectives. We have Claudia Nierenberg from NOAA, the Climate Division. How do we say it? Climate Program Office. Okay, NOAA Research. And Sarah McCue, who has a deep background in so a whole variety of technology things, but also in the UN and the World Bank. And then Aaron Rose, who is the chair of the advisory board for StarTides. So I thought the discussion today would be not so much what we have heard today, but what is it from the government and from the World Bank, NGO, tech perspective, and from the business perspective, can these entities do to encourage people to get involved in meeting the challenges of adapting to climate change? So with that said, I think Sarah has a set of slides for us, and we will proceed.
Oh, I need my glasses. I'm so sorry.
No problem.
Sorry about that. And hello, everyone. I am so pleased to be with you to share an overview of the expert circles on climate issues that are forming through the Knowledge Impact Network, where I have served as a pro bono global advisor for 3 years, and they started 3 years ago, so I've been with them since the inception. I was asked to give first a quick overview of my work with the UN and the World Bank over the last 20 years to give context to the climate issues on which I'm currently focused. A transformative moment was when I experienced the internet in an ethics class at the University of Michigan, where we communicated online in discussion forums using these terminals based around campus. And it was obvious from this personal experience when I was just a sophomore that the internet had and still has such power to transform societies. And most of my career has been focused on leveraging technology to elevate those who are living at the base of the pyramid. I started with the U.S. Small Business Administration, where I counseled small and medium-sized enterprises on foreign market entry strategies, later creating websites for SMEs so that we can put them under a microscope and study their experiences as they began to participate in e-commerce. I first joined the United Nations International Trade Center, which is based in Geneva. It's an arm of the World Trade Organization, and it's tied to the UN Trade and Development Organization. And I joined them to bring economic development approaches, policy, training programs, and a series of publications on technical aspects of the export process. And I recently consulted to the ITC on smart use of AI for SMEs in developing countries for a publication that I co-authored in which we focus on the distinct perils and promise of AI and the safeguards that we need to put in place as AI grows and becomes more human-like. For here we see a human almost touching a robot, akin to Michelangelo's creation of man, where God is about to give life to Adam. And now we face a very real prospect that man is giving life to artificial intelligence. I left ITC to join the World Bank to build partnerships with Silicon Valley firms, including with Google and Cisco, to create an education portal for youth in developing countries focused on these critical issues. I began to focus on online education in my work and at Georgetown, where I teach in the IT management program. And I'm also researching how online education and training is delivered at various universities so that we can deliver that into a developing country context. In 2015, a hedge fund CEO asked me to create a no-cost online master's degree program in data analytics for the financial sector. I didn't give a hoot about the hedge fund industry, but it was a fascinating question, so I accepted the challenge. World Quant University was launched in 2017 and has graduated more than 12,000 students in more than 100 countries at zero cost to the student. And it costs $3.2 million to build and far less to operate annually, with a cost per student at $478 a year. And this is truly a game changer, that education can be provided at a fraction of the cost of traditional education. And we are now developing our next online university in entrepreneurship for remote, rural, developing country regions, where we are prioritizing an ignored market to educate, train, mentor, and create a repository of video pitches so that investors interested in this extreme bottom of the pyramid, and they can help grow this market. Our model provides education where it is not available, to bring the engine of entrepreneurship where there is an economic activity. By focusing on startups in clean water and sanitation, affordable and clean energy, and above all, sustainable economic growth to the BOP communities. You can see that we prioritize sustainable communities, responsible consumption and production, and climate action. Excuse me, and lifelong engagement with them, so that as they become community leaders who will become comfortable leading in peace and insisting on transparent governance, which, after all of my years in international development, I agree with the former president of the World Bank. He said the one problem starts with a C, and it is the cancer of corruption that is killing developing country markets. And so we want to work with them so that they understand corruption that has been limiting the lives and livelihoods of billions for far too long. And we cannot do this without individuals willing to share their knowledge, and this is a warm welcome to join us as we develop the online university in entrepreneurship for remote rural regions. As I mentioned, I joined the Knowledge Impact Network a few years ago to share my own knowledge, connections, and resources to support social impact ventures looking to bring innovative solutions, particularly in the education and climate sectors. The KIN impact circles bring a diversity of experts who are convened to drive meaningful change together, primarily from the private sector, but NGOs are, of course, welcome to provide their perspective and experience as well. And I'd like to briefly focus on the circles that have formed to bring these bold solutions to climate-related initiatives. There's an African Solutions Circle focused on nature-based solutions, biodiversity, and food security. The AgSmart Climate Circle is being piloted in Zimbabwe with plans to scale the solution into other countries. The Food Security Circle is conducting a search for innovative solutions and global hunger to identify investment opportunities that will bring these solutions to others. The Carbon Removal Circle will be focused on coordinating and scaling the best approaches in reforestation, water-based solutions, soil sequestration techniques. The Clean Water Circle will work with global experts on how solutions can be scaled more rapidly to bring clean water to communities. And the newest circle is going to launch in June, and it's focused on the impact of nanoplastics on human health, showing that exposure to plastics is linked to increase in cancer in babies, neurodevelopment disorders in children, early onset cancer in young adults, an increase in stroke and heart attack in adults born after 1965. I would be happy to send the culmination of my research after having read countless medical studies in the past several months, including a study that's getting a lot of attention that was released in January that found 240,000 particles of nanoplastics in 1 liter of bottled water. Though, how many headlines, as we're facing with the climate crisis, how many headlines will we read before we become numb to them? These are just some of the alarming headlines that show the magnitude of the health risks posed by plastics, of course, in our environment, but also in our bodies. How many times will we say before we demand a change in the water, food, and plastics products that billions are consuming around the planet? We don't understand why babies are being diagnosed with leukemia. She was so young, so full of life. I just don't understand why I got bowel cancer. I'm a vegetarian, I'm organic, I work out, I'm in, perfect health. We really don't understand why cancer rates are exploding. How many times do we have to hear that on NPR before we find the solution? We can't figure out why the spike in neurodevelopmental disorders, including autism and ADHD, are spiking. Excuse me. And something that stayed with me when I heard a researcher who was asked what he thought was driving the spike in cancer, and he said so clearly, it's going to be the plastics. It was some of the most hopeful news I've read in a long time when just last week, the European Court of Human Rights ruled against Switzerland based on a case brought by more than 2,000 Swiss women who argued that climate change fueled heat waves undermined their health and quality of life and put them at risk of dying. The court found the Swiss government violated the violated the women's human rights to effective protection from serious adverse effects of climate change on their lives, health and well-being and quality of life due to, quote, critical gaps in its national legislation to reduce planet heating emissions, as well as a failure to meet past climate targets. I pulled that from the New York Times because I just thought it was so fascinating. I'm curating the nanoplastic circle and hope our multidisciplinary experts will recommend a similar approach, but we cannot wait while corporations will surely fight any type of control or limitation, despite it being clear that nanoplastics are undermining our health, our own quality of life, and are putting billions at risk of premature death. These are the things that keep me up at night, but I'm awake, not from fear, but excitement for the change that is happening and will happen. For I have seen repeatedly that it is the intersection of imparting knowledge of what is working to scale existing solutions that will solve these seemingly intractable problems. To use critical thinking and respectful cooperative dialogue to find the best practices, engage with founders, funders, and those desperate for solutions, and breakthroughs that will bring health, a revived planet, and economic growth for all, not just some. So thank you very much, Lynn, for prioritizing this discussion, and thank you all for your time today. I'd love to link with you all on LinkedIn because that's where I do my updates. I'm reading scientific journal articles in the middle of the night, and I do my little summaries all the time. We have to press for advocacy. People aren't aware of what's going on with nanoplastics. We have to press for policy, for laws and regulations, because people just don't understand the human impact of nanoplastics. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Ready?
Hi. That was so interesting, and maybe it's because I come from NOAA, and I've always wondered why they refer to just marine debris. It's not particularly engaging. It's how it's looked at, but very, very interesting. Thank you. My name's Claudia Nierenberg, and I'm at NOAA in NOAA research. So many of you might know NOAA from Fisheries Service and Ocean Service, Weather Service. So I'm in the research side, and for a long, long time have spent time thinking about climate services. And through that time has gone from the kinds of things that Jim Kinter talked about, how we support climate modeling to do better diagnostics and throw more information at people. And it took us a long, long time to evolve into the fact that all of society is working to metabolize these changes all at once at every scale. And the title, much of what Lynn asked in terms of how does government and business and nonprofit provide opportunities for people to make a difference? And I think that's what we heard in the last talk. A lot of this we heard in the last panel, So when you look at what governments are doing in municipalities, how codes and standards are changing, how laws are changing, it's no longer voluntary. It's no longer something that we have to impose. Markets are changing. Bond ratings are changing. So the question that Lynn posed is huge right across the government. How are governments involving people? How is FEMA moving from an individual buyout program to understand how communities might migrate? How is HUD moving from the way it approaches disasters for maybe housing that is manufactured for the short term? So it's an enormous question, and I'm from one small perch, but from the perch of how we sponsor science and research in my program, which is called Climate and Societal Interactions. I'll share a few thoughts about that. So I think first, in terms of thinking how we involve people, we have had success with placemaking, what people generally call placemaking, or regional scales, and this is something you heard very much in the last talk. And so choices and decisions and options and what people have to do in their lives, you've heard this here again, that the priority is not often what can I do about climate change. The priority is where do I live, how can I work under these circumstances, whether it's heat or sea level or my health, how can I educate my children? And so until we get this into their metabolism, we're not going to see a lot of change. We're starting to see it. People are starting to pay a lot of attention. And these challenges that people have are not just about a hazard. They're often complex and connected. So during COVID, we did a study of small businesses that were affected by both COVID, and you remember small businesses with the shutdown had a particular relationship with government. And then during those 2 years, of course there were hurricanes, of course there were fires. And so small businesses were forced to handle a lot, and many of them not prepared and not set up to do that. So that's another way that people get involved through their entrance here, whether it's through a disaster or through trying to cope through that. Another way we get people or we involve with communities is to evaluate with them. What does it mean to adapt? What are their standards and their metrics, and how can we build that into our own? Are we reaching these people? And often, while governments they like metrics and defined outcomes, which used to be number of grants or number of publications, we're finding a lot of success now with stories, narratives, where these are narratives from real experience and how they can show where people want to be in this conversation. So I'll put that out there just for people to chew on. I mentioned climate services, and from an agency, the agency that has a lot of operational responsibilities in weather and fish and oceans, it takes a while to expand those norms and values into climate services that meet the edge of public services. So it's a theme you've heard here a lot today about how you can work more together. While culturally we're sort of wired in the federal government to stay in our lanes, we get our appropriations in our lanes, we get our laws in your lanes, we're not going to meet this goal of involving more people and having more impact until we get out of our lanes, whether with other government agencies, different scales of agencies, the private sector, which is huge. We have to figure out new ways to do that, to involve people. So that means we have to do what it takes to get into the issues like permitting, funding. We had an announcement coming out of a NOAA climate program on fiscal pathways. Until we understand how money is made available, what the barriers are, you can't really get into metrics of adaptation. And most of the government, as you well know, is quite slow. And it was built to stay institutionally the same. Economists, they build in blips, but the idea is to go back to a steady state. So there's been some talk here about the cost benefits or the argument to make that it's now cheaper, more effective to adapt. I think the evidence is overwhelming. But yes, it's true that if you're working with municipalities who have to report to their government, their structures, or you're working with states or private sector, you do have to have those metrics and quantification at hand. So I think our job is to inspire collaboration in every way we can, to attract the next generation of students who've grown up. This is their reality. And a lot of these people want in their hearts to do this and to be part of this. And it's pushing change at the university level and the government level. I know in talking to young people in private equity, really interesting that they're looking for possibilities to meet their fiduciary obligations, of course, but do so genuinely in ways that promote sustainability. I'll stop by saying that that I was at a conference in New York earlier last week, and it was the Urban Land Institute's Resilience Summit. This is the 5th year the Urban Land Institute has done this, and if you don't know them, they're real estate developers, owners, and finance people. And Shalini Vahala, who many of you might know from an illustrious career, she was I think an architect and also an engineer, and she was at EPA for a long time. And she had 2 interesting things to say that really got my attention, and I thought you might be interested in. And one was keep people moving to better off. This is a long process. This is not, using one kind of product or tool. It's going to be a long, long investment. And that nothing succeeds like success in terms of sharing stories, getting people involved, showing the places they might do better. That these demonstrations inspire ideas about joining in. And she focused on the underappreciated experts, and that's been referred to in different ways here. That the people that we work with on the ground who have these experiences all the time, and over the course of their lives, their careers, their investments, and learning how to bring that in and value it, and in my case, be able to recognize it in a research setting, which actually means changing some of the ways we do federal funding announcements. Which is tremendously important. So I'm going to stop there, and so I'll turn it over, and hopefully we'll have some time for discussion. Thanks very much.
Thank you. Aaron?
Well, I'm a bit of a fill-in for a speaker, but so I don't have a formal presentation, and I'm going to kind of jump around a couple of things. Give a little bit about my background and put some things in context. My name is Aaron Rose. I'm the chair of the Star Tides Advisory Board, and thank you on behalf of Star Tides for supporting us and being out here for our 17th annual capabilities demonstration. I am based in San Jose, California, and as a professional, I wear 3 different hats. One is that I'm I guess what they call an angel investor. I started my career where you just are individual investor versus a VC. I do not do VC. I provide my own capital to startups. I've been doing it for 31 years. So I provide financial support and advisory support to startups and supporting people that are a lot smarter than I am, and but that I'm in a position to take the 3 a.m. calls when they're in an utter panic of having to meet payroll or having a meeting with a prospective customer. And my expertise in the startup world is not technical. I understand business strategy, and particularly when it comes to global business. I've had the fortunate of working in developed and developing markets around the world. And so I've starting, back to South Africa in 95, as well as an old startup search company in 95, and mobile technology and mobile apps, renewable energy in the 2000s, and like with everyone else, we're looking at frontier technology, AI particularly, and Gen AI. So a little bit of context. Let me kind of go, like I said, I just found out a few minutes about doing this, but let me go to my blog that I've been maintaining since 2008 called GT Perspectives. Helps if I can spell. And gtperspectives.com. No internet search. Okay. Yeah, maybe not a connection. That's okay. I can. There we go. There we go. Gotta have sometimes a www. So I'm all about transparency. So I get a lot of unsolicited, no one knows Aaron Rose. I'm not a big name. And no one knows me, but I get a lot of unsolicited proposals from entrepreneurs that think they're going to build the next unicorn, next billion-dollar valued company. And so they kind of cut to the chase. This is the agenda of the meeting that I do. And this is the agenda. If you want to follow the agenda during the meeting, this is it. Candidly, I'm surprised on how many entrepreneurs come to my office when we're meeting in person or now virtually, don't follow the agenda. And, you know, I, right or wrong, I think systematically, and we don't follow the agenda, we end it. But there's a question of, you know, most startups fail, right? And most startups fail because 8 out of 10 on average startups fail. And about half of those, from my experience, has been complete failures. You invest $150,000, you know, within 18 months, 24 months, that company's completely insolvent. There's also the other half, 4 of those 8 fail and they underperform. So, you know, our transparency, I invested $100,000 in a company 20 years ago. I got my 100 grand back, but my return on investment was $40. Was not the, you know, 500,000, 5 times ROI I was hoping for. So, you know, and only 2, and it's about risk. It comes down to risk is the whole point here. So, you know, in this we talk about the risk factors, but really, you know, the world I live in, for the most part until recently, was 7 risks. The risk to the product, the risk to the technology. Now, if you're a SaaS company, software, you know, platform, your technology is your product. The market risk, then that's both sectoral. So if you're creating another search engine, how are you going to compete with Google? If you're creating another e-commerce, how are you going to compete with Amazon? Market is also geographic. If you're going to do work in China, obviously that's a challenge. The big thing with market risk now is if you're planning to do business in the global south, you are competing against Chinese companies. We are behind the ball on that. If you're competing in Ethiopia, your biggest competitor is not another African or Ethiopian startup, it's a Chinese company. So that's that. Management risk, scale risk, capital risk was when I had 7 of these in exit risk. And the reason why I want to emphasize is climate risk. I added climate risk about 4 or 5 years ago, recognizing that it is a significant risk to even startups. Little tiny startups in San Jose, California have to be dealing with climate risk. And when I first met Lynn several years ago, I kind of showed him this used to be the anatomy of the 10-minute pitch. And really, you know, it's like a job interview. I also tell startups, you know, it's a job interview. The first 10 minutes, we might have an hour meeting for a job, but I've made up my mind within the first 10 minutes. And the rest of the time is like, okay, how am I going to fit this woman or man into my company, or what am I missing? What, you know, it's the same thing with startups. I know within the first 10 minutes whether I'm going to continue the conversation and really get to know. But it became from 10 minutes to 12 minutes because of climate risk. And down here, we got the risks, right? 80% fail. I like to know the 3 top risks, but the impact. Right before that, we've got the impact. And what's your company's ESG strategy? And which of the UN's SDGs are your companies trying to address? So to the question that Lynn proposed, it's the bridge between the nonprofit, government, academia, and private sector. The challenge I have in the private sector is understanding those risks. What are the risks involved, and what are the risks when it comes like climate risk? Where I would like to see more of this is working with particularly the non-governmental organizations, be more of advisory versus more advocacy. Right or wrong, it's my skin in the game. It's the founders, that means money. And I find my experience, particularly NGOs, are too much of an advocacy, too much pressure. And if you don't do it this way, we're gonna criticize your company publicly. And I've experienced that too much. What I'd like to see is more of an advocacy and advisory is one aspect. Academia, I'm not an academic, even though I served in an advisory board at my alma mater, Seattle University, for several years. I don't teach, I don't have an advanced degree, I'm not an academic, but there's so much research that's done that I do wish, and I don't know what the answer is, but hopefully this is the beginning of a conversation, that more of those great reports and that research comes out and that can be utilized and shared in a way that certainly startups that have very limited resources can tap into. Not to mention the big corporations, the Fortune 500s, and I've advised the Microsofts and those type of companies on how to navigate some challenges. Bless you. But again, I keep on going to the risk factors because the other thing I like to go to is, speaking of Microsoft, just to show kind of a nerd I am, right? Some of you may like, the 10K, right? The 10K is a report that publicly traded companies have to file with the SEC every year. Full disclosure, I'm a shareholder of Microsoft. I'm not a major shareholder, but they are in my portfolio. And you look at, by law, every publicly traded company has to file this document. For US issuers, it's called a 20F. But for foreign issuers, it's a 20F. For US companies, it's a 10K. So the 10K, I'm a nerd, I admit it. I like to sit down and read 109 pages. But of all these sections, item 1A, the risk factors. And these are generally, it's pretty amazing, these are the risks that the company has to disclose to its shareholders. And climate risk is becoming, generally they're the risks to the company, the risks to the markets they're operating in. Many of the 8 risks that I subscribe to when evaluating startups are embedded in this, and you're starting to see climate risk put into this. Microsoft can pay the McKinseys of the world and others to help come up with this. But 52% of the US economy or whatever it is small business. Cannot pay for that. So that's what I'm looking for is, again, the more of knowledge sharing. That's what StarTides is, a global knowledge sharing network. But the knowledge sharing of helping advise entrepreneurs, whether they're Washington, D.C., San Jose, California, Khartoum, Sudan, wherever they may be, Kyiv, Ukraine. I've been talking with lots of startups lately in Kyiv, and idea of how to diminish the risk. And the big thing is just becoming aware of the risks that exist. So I lay out a lot of things and not sure where to go, but I'll probably just leave it there. And then I guess the last point I might add is when it comes to the different risks, the SEC, as we know, as kind of touched on earlier, has softly proposed a change to how it's going to be, companies have to disclose climate risk. My crystal ball says that will not pass without a congressional mandate. That it will be litigated in court, and ultimately it'll be, I would suspect that the current Supreme Court will rule that it's an overreach of the executive branch. But it has forced companies, small and large, to look at how they evaluate, address climate risk. And I'll leave it there. So thank you.
So what do you think? So let me go to the audience. What have you taken from today in terms of things that you have heard that you might be interested in doing more of as a result of some of the discussions we've had today? Please.
Well, I think a number of people who have attended are running or trying to run or getting started small businesses of one kind or another to do a lot of these things. And so we're exactly at this stage that you pointed out that we have a number of weaknesses. We know what needs to be done, but securing the resources to do that, whether it's information or whether it's finance or capital, that seems to be the hardest thing. And in particular, at least in my case, if you're working outside the United States and you're trying to address a lot of these challenges, these holistic challenges that you're facing, these are multi-level, multivariate problem sets. That gets exceedingly difficult because the places we know to get resources are where we come from, in this case, perhaps the United States, but the places that we're trying to do the work are not the US. And usually the first thing that comes up anytime you say, in my case, for example, Africa, is, oh my God, that's just too risky, that's dangerous, that's this, that's that. And no matter what you do to try to explain to people that there are all sorts of ways to mitigate risks if you know that environment, it's just incredibly hard to get people to realize that and to accept it. The other thing I realize as I've been talking to the people is we in the US have set up a system where, if you will, you have people who have expertise in different tranches, if you will, of business, government, and so forth. And they tend to have that expertise there. And yet, when you're the practitioner trying to do things, you are trying to go up and down levels. And so if I go to somebody and I say I have a $5 million project, it says I only do things that are 50 million or above. And I go to someone else and they say, oh, 5 million, that's too much for me. And so I haven't been able to figure out how to square that, but I have identified some people I want to ask questions to help me figure out how do you finish closing that circle. In my case, I always bring in, for example, and insist on at least 25% of the capital for the businesses that I start in Africa have to be from people in that country that I'm setting the business up. I want local capital, I want skin in the game, plus people who have made money there know how to make money there, and they also know how to protect their investment. And so already that's not only a capital raising thing, but a risk reduction thing. But what I see is a great opportunity to exchange ideas, but I still haven't found the avenues yet to find my particular solutions in terms of capital raising or things of that nature.
So, by the way, Frederick has one of my favorite stories from Star Tides. Is he's working on a company to build vehicles in Senegal for the African market, and special design for Africa. Anyway, but in the course of one of the past meetings, he met someone who was doing compressed earth brick making. And the potential, I guess I don't know if they haven't broken ground in the factory yet, but you've actually talked about having that compressed earth brick maker be part of the process of making the factory for your company.
I met those people initially at Star Tides, and they've connected me to a world of compressed earth block construction and all of the positive aspects to that from a climate perspective as well as just from a business bottom line perspective. It's just going to be cheaper and I'll make money.
So those are the stories we like to hear. Other points? Well, it now being 1 minute. Yes?
Wanted to follow up on your compressed brick anecdote, and also through today, a theme that went through all the sessions was the need to be cross-cutting, the need to engage all stakeholders, the need to not pick one particular stovepipe and go down that stovepipe, and that goes counter to a lot of what our educational system and our society is used to doing. And yet we have to learn, academics have to learn to get out with practitioners. We heard Jim Kinter's panel, or and Leah's, and the panel that Jeremy monitored, the one just before ours, talking about the academics getting out of their ivory tower and engaging with the stakeholders to do cross-cutting climate solutions. And you can't just look at sea level rise. You have to look at all the climate impacts and the health impacts and the agricultural impacts and the food security impacts. And you just have to go. You can't. It's the biggest systems problem humanity has ever faced, and I just wanted to say that was one of the takeaways that I've had.
Kathy, thank you. So let me just wrap up here with the panel. Sarah, do you have any last comments? Claudia?
Just on that final comment, I think it is it's been, I think the language is important. So systems problems, enterprise, transformation, transformative, what those things mean. And in a forward-looking way, food systems change that help our nutrition and help our landscape and work under aridification. And health systems that, we talk about this as the co-benefits. Like, can we walk in through adaptation and mitigation into a place where we're actually coming in addressing the things that are proximate to people. So I encourage the team here to keep going on those problems. It'll be the best way to engage.
Aaron?
Actually, I'd like to answer your question, because the last risk of my system is exit risk. So I have a disclosure. I was an early investor of MTN in Johannesburg in 1995. And the only way I had a very fruitful return on investment is because MTN listed their shares publicly in the Joburg Stock Exchange. We may follow the same people on LinkedIn talking about how much has been invested in Africa in the last few years. That's wonderful. What I'm looking for, and I've been doing business in Africa for a long time, is the return on investment. You start a company in San Jose, you have the potential, or anywhere in the United States, of listing your shares on the NASDAQ, or NYSE. To this day, in 2024, I'm still surprised at how immature the public exchanges are in Africa. And I get frustrated on how no one's really speaking about that. I mean, again, I'm small minnow in a very big ocean. And so again, you can put money in, but investors want their money out. And so I think we have to address more of that going forward. But it is, again, it's risk, and that's exit risk. I tend to try to be, as much as I tend to be, as my friends and colleagues will observe, I tend to be maybe more critical, pessimistic, but ultimately it's about it's optimism. It's one thing I like about Star Tides. It's the ability to come here and meet, and we can be critical, but I always leave, a sense of optimism and what's the possibility. And we'll talk about it tomorrow, that even Star Tides itself is on a cusp of transformation. And what is it that this organization wants to be in the next 5 years? I always, it's in that blog post, but the first question I ask, and if you have a company, in 5 years' time, what's the company you're solving, and to whom are you solving it for? That's more important to me than what is it you're doing. I'm meandering a little bit here, but try to get to focus. But I think, an observation would be, again, a sense of optimism that we do have different people from different backgrounds, international. I'd like to do, I know, the advisory board talked about doing more international, getting Star Tides to be more international, but really trying to tap into that knowledge that we have, the experiences, and how do we harness that? How do we leverage that in our respective, professions and going forward with some kind of a focus on a sustainable solution. And so I'm always pleased by what I've heard today. Very optimistic of where we're going, despite the challenges. That so I moved to California just 3 years ago. I was in Seattle for 25 years, and talked about the salmon. There were reports. I moved to Seattle in '97. I remember a University of Washington report at the School of Fisher Science in, I think, '98, '99, talked about the plastics in salmon, and it was coming up. They're finding in the food source there, and now it's kind of become more headlines. So getting there, the sense of urgency, I think, is loud and clear. Sarah's presentation brought that out, and we'll go from here. But that's my concluding comment.
And so my concluding comments is there's beverage and food in the lobby waiting for us. Thank you all very, very much for staying with us today. And tomorrow is going to be a day more for the exhibitors, chance to work among themselves. Obviously, we'd hope to get as many attendees back as possible. But thank you all I've learned a lot today, and look forward to continuing. Thank you.